Welcome back to Talking Europe for our Islands special. And the palm trees behind me might be a bit of a clue as to our location. This is Martinique, an 8-hour plane ride from Paris, but a French overseas department, which means it's as much a part of France and the EU as Marseille or Montmartre. Well, you might think that the French Caribbean is all about cane sugar and bananas, and for once, the cliché is kind of true. Every other banana eaten in France comes from the French Caribbean, and 1 in 20 workers in Martinique is employed in banana farming. However, as we know, man cannot live on bread or indeed bananas alone. So how does this island feed itself? What's it like being part of the European Union, but 7,000 kilometres from Brussels and an island 1/30th the size of Belgium? Another key question as increasingly fierce hurricanes hit Martinique and its neighbours. How are these islands working to combat the threats of climate change? Do come with us as we find out more. Well, we've come to the Balata Gardens, where you can see where Martinique gets its nickname, the Island of Flowers. There are more than 3,000 varieties of plants here, in fact. Anthuriums, heliconias, and my fave, the torch gingers. We're here to meet someone who represents Martinique at the European level, MEP Louis-Joseph Monscourt. Hello, thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you.
Now, we know that in Martinique, everything seems to grow here, but the main crops are bananas and cane sugar. Clearly, though, that's not enough to actually feed the whole island, is it?
Well, we don't just have bananas and cane sugar. You know, 50 or so years ago, Martinique produced and was self-sufficient in food. Unfortunately, since then, we've lost our farm smallholdings and the traditional Creole kitchen gardens, where people could plant what they needed to feed themselves. Now it's all about exports, and I think it's a great shame.
Well, a huge concern today, adding to that, is climate change. Martinique and the whole region very much touched by this. Well, in the next European agriculture budget, there's a stipulation that at least a third of the rural development funding has to be spent on measures to combat environmental harm and climate change. Of course, it's a global issue, but where do you think Martinique should be spending that money?
Putting 30% of that funding into environmental issues and safety is a very good thing. As for us here specifically, I think we have a lot of work to do in building, in protecting our water resources and rivers.
Well, there's one subject that I think we have to talk about in relation to agriculture on these islands. I'm sure you're aware of this, the Claude scandal. Now, this is a very toxic pesticide that was massively deployed, particularly in banana plantations here. This for 17 years after it had been banned in the US and 3 years after it was banned in the rest of France. Now, chlordécone is found in 90% of the Martinique population currently. It's linked to very high levels of prostate cancer and a rate of premature births that's 4 times higher than the rest of France. With more on this story, Edward Hayward.
In 1976, the US banned the use of chlordécone after scientific studies showed it was dangerous, but banana plantations in the French West Indies continued to use it until 1993. The authorities' lack of action had serious consequences for the population. According to a study by the French Institute of Health, years of exposure to chlordécone have increased the number of prostate cancer patients on the island. Martinique currently has one of the highest number of prostate cancer cases in the world.
I was a farmer at the Casapolo plantation, and I developed cancer because of the level of chlordécone in my blood.
Francois Vaillant is one of the 10,000 farmers who worked without any protection on the banana plantation for years. A few farmers' rights associations have tried to take legal action to help victims, but they were not successful. Not a single complaint has led to a trial. But Josiane refuses to give up. Working in a maternity ward, she saw all too well the impact of chlordécone on the population.
I worked here for 7 years. I was a paediatrician in this ward, and at that time we saw so many premature babies. There were a lot of premature births.
In 2010, she commissioned a successful study to prove the correlation between pesticide poisoning and premature birth. Yet, nothing has changed. There is currently no effective way to get rid of the chlordicone from the soil. Regardless, Abdul Jire continues to grow fruits on the contaminated land. He is part of the new strategy to encourage fruit exports, the zero chlordicone label introduced by the Regional Natural Park of Martinique. Fruit that grow above the ground are considered toxic-free, since chlordicone cannot travel through tree trunks.
Les plantes que je cultive n'ont pas de chlordécone.
The plants that I grow don't contain any traces of chlordicone, and several laboratories have confirmed this. It is possible for us to get our act together, and it is my earnest wish that we ensure that future generations are guaranteed products that won't damage their health.
For the first time, a French president has publicly acknowledged chlordicone poisoning in the French West Indies. He has asked for reports to explain the magnitude of the contamination. If no viable solution is found soon, Martinique's land will stay contaminated by this poisonous pesticide for centuries to come.
Well, we're still in the Balata Gardens and still with Louis-Joseph Monscourt. We've just been learning about chlordicone there. And President Macron came here in September 2018 and made headlines because he was the first French president to call this situation an environmental scandal, and he said that the state should take some responsibility. What does that mean to you? Just a good headline, or will it bring real action?
Listen, we've been living with this problem for almost 30 years now. When I was a member of the National Parliament, we set about informing people and made a number of recommendations to the government of the time. One was to compensate the farmers, and a second was to work on research that could find solutions to these now 30-year-old problems.
So what then about the food that's being grown in Martinique now? We know chlordicone will take many years to break down. Some scientists say a century, others 7 centuries. How can Martinique move on?
We have to make it so that certain types of production, like bananas, can be grown on chlordicone land. This is possible, but we can't grow root vegetables in contaminated ground. There are still some lands that are not contaminated. Perhaps we need to intensify our farming on these lands.
I'm sure it's a debate that is going to continue for many years. For now, though, thank you very much, Louis-Joseph Monscourt.
Thank you very much.
Well, between climate change, the toxic pesticide scandal, and of course, the feisty local insects that you find all around the Caribbean, one might wonder how any farming gets done here. But overall, agriculture is a strong sector here, and one that's tentatively branching out into new methods. That includes organic farming and even plants that fight back. Our reporters Yoann Baudin and Stéphane Baudin have been to find out more.
Welcome to Trenel, a shanty town in the hills of Fort-de-France. Many years ago, former sugarcane cutters moved here. Today, their grandchildren are finding a renewed connection with the land. One example is Théo and his friends, who have turned a former landfill into a community garden.
What we wanted to do was to surprise the people of Martinique. We wanted to show that with willpower and determination, we could turn a dump into a garden. Anything is possible.
Trenel's underprivileged inhabitants can now choose produce from more than 1,000 square metres of vegetables. 8 volunteers tend to the garden using no pesticides and no fertiliser.
We use several agricultural techniques here, and we get our inspiration from Creole gardens. People forget certain things. The spinach plant, for example, we didn't plant it, it just popped up.
In just a few years, more than 1,000 hectares of small Creole gardens were put back into operation, and some volunteers are putting their whole faith into a new generation of gardeners.
He's 18. So much respect. More than 60% of young adults are unemployed. But Dylan here is his own boss. He goes to school as well. We're not going to save the planet, that's true, but we can save 10 young men and women. Then in turn, they will save 10 young men and women. That's what we want.
Léon owns 7 hectares of land, all dedicated to market gardening. The fields at the foot of Mount Pelée are one of the few areas where the highly toxic chlordecone was not used.
Intensive farming and the monoculture habit have destroyed our soil. But today, Martinique can become a completely organic land, and agriculture will be able to feed families all over the island.
Organic farming is now practiced by 60 farmers, but it only covers 300 hectares, a tiny percentage of agriculture on the island, but it is gaining ground.
The rules that apply in Europe don't always apply here. It is true. However, there's an increasing number of farmers who are beginning to use organic techniques which respect the environment but don't necessarily fall under EU certification.
On this campus, there are 17 researchers who work on finding local and ecological solutions. This entomologist is currently studying the pheromones produced by thyme and basil.
The tropics are home to an incredible level of diversity, which means we often picture large amounts of pests that come with that diversity. But there are also predators and parasitoids in the natural environment, so we try to favour that natural biological struggle.
Michel Keane grows organic bananas, the plant which has suffered the most from pesticide use. He owns some 40 hectares, the only organic banana plantation in the French Caribbean, and it's all thanks to a very secret recipe.
We have about 65,000 litres of this product, and we regularly reseed the earth with bacteria, fertiliser and mushrooms. And all of our products are certified organic.
It took Michel 10 years of hard work and EU financial help, but his bananas are now thriving and even ending up in markets in continental France.
So we've seen lots of ideas and lots of projects. To round off the show, we thought it would be great to get up close and personal with some of the products. These are locally grown avocados, passion fruit, hibiscus, mandarins, okra, oranges, and the local endemic Martinican variety of dragon fruit, all grown by this man, Abdul Giro. Very nice to meet you. Now, we saw you earlier in our programme in the report about chlordecone, how you managed to grow all these fruits untouched by chlordecone on land where there was contamination. This one, a Martinican fruit, as I said. Could we possibly taste one?
Of course, my pleasure. You'll see that we're able to grow very good fruit that is not contaminated by chlordecone. So I'll cut this fruit. It's a pitaya.
Pitaya, ou l'équivalent en anglais c'est dragon fruit.
Thank you. When we were talking just before, I said to you, it's like paradise here, but you said paradise where sometimes we suffer. What did you mean by that?
In general, farming is hard work. What's more, the climate here means we occasionally have hurricanes, and when a hurricane passes through, basically it would make anyone want to cry. But it's up to us to feed ourselves, rather than relying on food coming from anywhere else.
Well, there is, of course, European funding that's meant to go towards farmers, particularly in places like Martinique, where that needs a little support. Earlier, I asked Miguel Laventure, who's in charge of handing out European funds here in Martinique, why there's such a low take-up here, as in other outermost regions of the EU.
These European funds have a particular organization, but beneficiaries are increasingly starting to get a sense of ownership of this money. This means that when farmers have to put together their applications, even if they find it complicated, they're getting them done more quickly. The methods of providing us with their documents is improving too, because of course we need proof that the farmer has spent money before we can give them compensation funding, and above all, the general organization becoming more dynamic.
Well, Abdul Jireh, we can see that you have had some European involvement in your work here. What do you think about this low take-up of European funding?
The administrative side doesn't always work well for us. There's a lot of red tape and it all takes a long time. It's especially hard for small-scale farmers. We're in what's known as an outermost region of the EU, and this means we have particular needs that aren't necessarily the same as in the rest of Europe.
Well, we've talked a lot about problems, but looking to the future, are you optimistic about your own production and production in Martinique in general?
Let's not forget that we have our own market of 400,000 inhabitants, and we have 1 million tourists per year, so the potential in this market is huge. What's more, people who come here want to discover local products. And that's one of the reasons why I think that if the political will is there among our authorities, we can turn things around, and quickly.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Abdul Jireh. I'm going to finish my lovely Martinican dragon fruit. Thank you.
Merci. À bientôt.
Well, thanks very much for watching our programme. We hope it's given you some tropical food for thought. We're heading back to Paris now. See you soon on Talking Europe.